I still clearly remember the day we met for the first time. We were small children, only 5 years old. Our parents took us to kindergarten, and it was there that I first saw a little girl with big, bright purple eyes nervously looking around. She looked a little lost and alone, so I decided to approach her so we could explore a new place together. Since then, we have been inseparable. Every day we played together, explored new corners of the playground, built sand castles, and shared secrets that were important only to us. Our parents watched with joy as we quickly found a common language, becoming friends who could understand each other in half a word. Our parents often organized weekends together, and we spent a lot of time together, even outside of kindergarten. We rode bikes, played ball, and even learned letters and numbers together. It seemed that our childhood years would be endless, filled with carefree laughter and adventures. But when we became teenagers, everything changed dramatically. One day, my father told me that he got a new job in another city, and we have to move in a few days. It was sudden and unexpected, and I couldn't figure out how to tell her that we would have to break up. That night, sitting in my room, I felt as if the whole world had begun to fall apart. The next day, I gathered my strength and came to her house. We were standing on the sidewalk in front of her house when I told her the news. Her eyes filled with tears, and I saw her purse, her lips trying to hold back her emotions. She looked like she couldn't believe what I was saying, and that only added to my pain. She suddenly threw herself into my arms, so tightly that I could hardly breathe. She held me as if she was afraid I would disappear if she let go even for a moment. I could feel her body shaking and her warm tears falling on my shoulder, and I wanted to say something to comfort us both, but the words just weren't there. When I got into the car to go, I saw her through the window. She was standing in the middle of the street, and her face was so devastated that I felt my heart clench painfully. I understood that this might be our last meeting, but I guess I didn't want to believe it. Years passed, and I kept thinking about her. I often thought back to our childhood, to those days when we did not yet know about all the difficulties that can divide people. But over time, our connection was lost, and although it hurt, I continued to live on. And so, many years later, when I returned to my hometown, I unexpectedly saw her on the street. She changed, became more mature and confident, but those violet eyes remained as unforgettable. They immediately awakened in me memories that seemed long forgotten. We stopped, our eyes meeting, and in that moment I realized that time had not erased what we once had. Her gentle smile melted the ice that had been building up in my heart for years, and I smiled back as if we had just found each other again. After that meeting, we decided to go together to a nearby cafe. This place used to be our favorite, and although many years have passed, not much has changed here. We sat down at a table near the window, and I could see how the light of the lamps dissipated, creating a cozy atmosphere that seemed to embrace us and transport us back to childhood. We began to remember our childhood adventures, shared games, and silly things we did together. These were simple but incredibly warm moments that suddenly came back to us. She laughed when I reminded her of our favorite sandcastle, and I could see her eyes light up with the same glow they had when we were children. Sometimes we just sat in silence, people watching outside the window and sipping our drinks. There was a sense of peace and understanding between us, as if no words were needed to convey what we were feeling at that moment. It was like a shared realization that fate had once again given us a chance we didn't expect. At a certain point, our conversation turned to the day we said goodbye, on the sidewalk in front of her house. It was painful to remember, but we both knew we couldn't avoid the subject. Her eyes darkened, and she quietly admitted that, at the time, she thought she would never see me again. I felt those words tear me apart from the inside again, and I caught myself thinking how much we had been hurt by that separation. We both wanted to clear our minds a bit, so we decided to go for a walk around the evening town. The streets were almost empty, but that added a special charm, as if the city belonged to just the two of us. We walked side by side, sometimes almost accidentally touching each other's shoulders, and I felt like time had turned back and we were once again those children playing together on the playground. We stopped by a river where the light of the moon reflected in the calm water. It was a place where we often played when we were children, and it seemed that the river remembered our every step and every laugh. I felt my heart shrinking a little with nostalgia, but at the same time it was overflowing with warmth. We stood next to each other and silently looked at the water that calmly flowed past us. The silence was comfortable, as if our hearts continued to speak, even when words were superfluous. We both knew we had come a long way, and while the separation was painful, it made the moment all the more important. At that moment, I decided that I could not lose her a second time. I quietly admitted that I couldn't forget her all this time and asked if we could try to start over. She looked at me in surprise, but her eyes shone with warmth and tenderness, and I knew we had both been waiting for this moment. She nodded slightly, and I saw her lips stretch into a faint but sincere smile. This moment was for us the beginning of a new path that we were going to walk together. And although we lost a lot of time, now we had the feeling that limitless possibilities had opened up before us. We continued our walk, crossing the old stone bridge that connected the two banks of the river. It was built decades ago, but it still stands strong, just like our childhood memories. We walked slowly, enjoying every moment of silence, which only intensified our sensations. All around, lanterns illuminated the path with a warm yellow light, and the picture was so peaceful that it seemed as if time had stopped. During our walk, it suddenly started to rain. At first, it was just a few drops, but in a few minutes the rain turned into a real downpour. We hid under the canopy, and I could see the drops of water falling to the ground, making a soft sound that echoed in the evening air. She was looking at me, and I felt that this moment was absolutely perfect, even if it was so unexpected. We were standing under a canopy, but the rain wasn't going to stop. Suddenly, she took my hand and offered to run in the rain. It was absolutely ridiculous, but we both started laughing and ran forward, leaving the dry roof of the shed behind. We ran down the empty street, soaking wet, but happy, like the children we once were. After a walk in the rain, we returned to her apartment, soaked, but with incredible smiles on our faces. She quickly prepared hot tea, and we sat on the couch, wrapped in blankets. From the window, you could see how the rain continued to beat on the windows, but inside it was warm and cozy, as if the whole world had remained somewhere far away. Sitting in a warm room, we started talking about the future. I asked her if she wanted to start over without the fear that circumstances would separate us again. She was looking at me, and there was a mixture of hope and indecision in her eyes, but I could sense that she wanted it too. We discussed for a long time what changes we were willing to accept in order to be together, and in the end, we came to a common decision: to try and not back down, no matter what. The next morning, when we woke up, the sun penetrated through the curtains, and the world looked fresh, clean, as if the rain had washed away all the past misunderstandings and difficulties. She made breakfast, and we ate together, discussing plans for the day and smiling as if we had finally found our harmony. It was clear that we still had a long way to go, but we were ready to go through it together. While we were walking in the park that day, we unexpectedly met our old friends with whom we used to play when we were children. They were also surprised to see us together, because everyone knew that we had lost touch many years ago. We told them about our chance meetings, and they looked genuinely happy, as if they were part of this reunion. We decided to organize a picnic in the park, together with our old friends. It was like going back to the days when we were kids and spent every summer here. They spread a blanket on the grass, spread baskets of food, and sat down together, enjoying the warm day. Our friends recalled funny moments from the past, and we all laughed, feeling like time had turned back, giving us a second chance. After the picnic, we stayed together, watching the sun set below the horizon. The evening sky was painted in shades of pink, orange, and purple, and everything looked incredibly beautiful. We sat next to each other, feeling the warmth of each other, and silently looked at this amazing picture of nature, as if it was created just for us. We started talking about what lies ahead. I shared my dreams. She talked about her desires, and it turned out that our plans and aspirations resonated. We both wanted a simple but happy life together, without the unnecessary complications that filled our years apart. It seemed that now that we had found each other again, nothing would stop us from making these dreams come true. When the sun finally hid behind the horizon and the sky became dark, the stars flashed above us. It was a moment of absolute silence and peace when the whole world seemed distant and unreachable. I approached her and our eyes met. Then I slowly leaned down and kissed her. It was as if we had sealed all our promises and hopes into one brief but tender moment. After a few days, we decided that we wanted to go on a trip together, to escape from everything, leave the city, and discover new places for ourselves. We sat at the table, looking at maps and preparing a plan. She suggested visiting old European cities, and I dreamed of seeing mountains and seas. We agreed to a compromise, choosing a route that would accommodate both her wishes and my dreams. The day of departure came, and we stood at the station holding our suitcases. The station was packed with people, but we felt like the world stopped just for the two of us. I could see the slight excitement in her eyes before starting a new adventure, and it made me smile. We embraced as we prepared to board the train that was to take us far away from the mundane, to new places and new experiences. Our first stop was in a small town by the sea. We strolled through the narrow cobblestone streets, listened to the waves crash against the shore, and breathed in the salty sea breeze. The evening rays of the sun illuminated us, creating a feeling of freedom and carefreeness. It was a new beginning, not only for our trip, but for us as a couple. In the evening, we decided to stay on the beach. A small fire was lit, and warm tongues of flame illuminated our faces. The stars were shining brightly, and the sound of the waves added magic to this moment. We sat next to each other, and the fire warmed us. But what warmed us the most was the feeling that we were together and things were going to be even better. After several weeks of traveling, we returned to the hometown where it all began. But now this city felt completely different, as if it had changed with us. We were no longer afraid of the future and knew that there were many more adventures ahead of us, because now we were together and nothing could stop us. Everything was fine until one day I received a call that changed everything. My boss informed me that the company had serious problems, and I was immediately sent to a remote city to deal with the situation. It was supposed to be a temporary business trip, but it was understood that it could be extended indefinitely. I was shocked and didn't know how to tell her. We had just begun to make our plans together, and now everything could fall apart. The evening we met, I finally mustered up the courage to tell her about the business trip. She looked surprised, and then her eyes turned sad. We were silent for a long time, standing on the threshold of our house. It wasn't like an ordinary goodbye. It was something bigger, something harder. I promised that we would stay in touch, but deep down I felt that something could go wrong. A few days later, I was already on a train that was taking me far away from everything I knew and loved. The city where I was supposed to work was very remote, and it took many hours to get there. I stared out the window, watching the landscape change, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was leaving a part of myself behind. My phone rang several times, but I couldn't bring myself to answer it for fear of hearing her voice, which sounded too far away. In the new place, everything was more difficult than I expected. The company was in chaos, and I had to sort out problems that seemed insurmountable. The days were getting longer, and work left almost no time for rest. Every time I tried to call her, the connection was unstable and messages did not go through. The feeling of isolation only increased, and every day I felt further away from home, further away from her. A dark office with piles of documents and computers burning with cold light. A man with dark hair and gray eyes sits at a table with his head in his hands, looking exhausted and depressed. Papers are chaotically spread around him, and graphs and data are visible on the monitor. The atmosphere of fatigue and despair. One evening, I went for a walk through the empty streets of the city. A cold wind blew across my face, and I couldn't shake the thought of her. Everything felt wrong, like I wasn't going my way. She was always there, supporting me, giving me warmth. And now that warmth is gone, leaving only emptiness. There was only one question in my head. Will I ever get back to her, or is it too late? When I arrived at work one morning, I was greeted by colleagues who looked excited. They reported that the situation at the company has only worsened, and now there is a possibility that the business trip will drag on even longer than expected. They told me that there was a chance to fix the problem, but it would require even more time and effort on my part. I nodded silently, realizing what that meant for me. Even more time away from home, away from her. I tried to call her, but the connection failed again. My messages remained unread, and every call ended with a disconnection tone. The uncertainty hurt, and the fear of losing her was starting to eat me up from the inside. Every now and then I would get short messages from friends, but they didn't have any news about her, and that made me feel even more cut off from the world. One night I had a dream in which I returned home. I was walking through the streets of our city, breathing the familiar air, and suddenly I saw her. She stood in the same place where we said goodbye and smiled as if nothing had changed. I ran to her, but the closer I got, the more she disappeared, dissolving into the air. I woke up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat, heartbroken and feeling hopeless. The days turned into weeks, and I felt that I could no longer live like this. I decided to contact the management and ask for the opportunity to return home, at least for a short time. I explained the situation, but the response was stern. Now is not the time, and my presence here is critical. This was the final blow that shattered my hope of a quick return. Some time later, I received an unexpected letter from a friend who knew our story. He wrote that he had not seen her for several days, and that she had seemed troubled the last time they spoke. He also mentioned that there were rumors in town that she might be dating someone new. After reading this, I felt the ground giving way from under my feet. My worst fear suddenly became a reality, and I didn't know how to deal with it. That night, I could not sleep. Every thought brought me back to her, to our memories and promises. I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, and realized that I couldn't just wait and suffer in the unknown. Despite everything that was happening, I decided that I would find a way to get back to see her and find out the truth, even if it meant risking losing everything I had worked for. I went outside early in the morning, knowing that this was my last chance. I looked at the gray sky above the city that had become my temporary home, and thought that I would only return here when I knew the truth. My heart beat faster, and I felt cold fear and hope at the same time. I didn't know what to expect, but I knew I couldn't live in the unknown any longer. I bought a ticket for the nearest train to my hometown. The road seemed endless, and each stop only increased my anxiety. I couldn't think about anything else but her. What will I find when I arrive? Will she be there, or is she still waiting for me? Every now and then I would close my eyes and see her smile, feeling my heart sink with the fear of losing this moment forever. When I arrived, the city seemed unfamiliar to me. It was the same place where we grew up, but something had changed. I walked the streets where we used to walk together, and now they seemed empty and cold. People hurried past me like shadows, and I felt as if I were lost in my own memories. My road led me to her house, and I didn't even know what to say to her when I saw her. I arrived at her house and saw that the windows were closed and the door looked like it hadn't been opened in a long time. I knocked, but no one answered. A neighbor passing by said she had moved a few days ago, and I had to ask her where. Nothing was clear, and the answers became even fewer. I felt hope leave me, leaving only emptiness. I sat down on a bench near the park where we used to walk when we were children. These places were filled with our memories, our conversations and dreams, and now they seemed empty to me, as if I were one of those who remember these moments. With each breath, I could smell smells that were once familiar, but were now unfamiliar and distant. All the dreams we had built seemed so fragile now. I was beginning to think that all was lost when suddenly the phone rang. It was her number. My heart stopped for a moment and then raced so hard I could feel every beat. I answered, and a short, difficult dialogue ensued. She said she heard about my return and wanted to meet. I felt a mixture of fear and hope. It was a chance to find out the truth. We agreed to meet in the evening in the same park. I came earlier and waited for her standing under a tree. The light from the lanterns scattered on the wet asphalt, and everything looked as if time stood still, waiting for our meeting. Eventually, I saw her silhouette at the other end of the walkway. She walked slowly, as if afraid to come any closer, and I felt my heart sink in anticipation. She came closer, and I saw tears on her face. We looked at each other, and whatever I was going to say disappeared. She explained that she couldn't wait for me forever, but she also couldn't find the strength to forget. She said she came here to find answers for herself, and now I had to provide those answers. I stood in front of her and understood that the time for conversation had passed. I just wanted her to know that no matter how much time passed, I came back for her. She looked at me as if trying to read the answers to all her questions in my eyes. I realized I couldn't hold it in anymore. I told her everything, how I felt all this time, how I couldn't sleep at night when I thought I'd lost her forever. I said that I wanted to forget everything that happened between us, but it was impossible. My heart was still with her even though we were far apart. She listened to me in silence, and I could see her eyes glistening with tears. She slowly looked up and finally spoke. Her voice was quiet but confident. She said that she had been waiting for me for a long time, trying every day to see if I would return. She admitted that she began to lose hope and did not know how much longer she could live in obscurity, but at the same time she couldn't forget what we had. She said that she was afraid that I would never come back, and this fear made her think about another life, about other possibilities. Her words swept through me, leaving a painful void. She said that for some time she tried to start a new life, to find another person who could give her a sense of security, but none of them could replace me. She understood that true love does not disappear, no matter how far you are. And although it was difficult, she decided not to deceive herself anymore and to accept the fact that my return had changed everything. I came closer to her and gently took her hand. She did not pull it away, but only tightened her grip on my palm. It was our first physical contact in so many years, and it said more than any words could. I could feel her fingers trembling and knew she was as afraid of losing this moment as I was. There were no more words between us, just this touch that showed we were ready to fight for our feelings. She took a step forward and hugged me as if she was afraid I would disappear again. I hugged her back, feeling the warmth of her body and the beating of her heart. She was there, real and alive, and I realized that this was the most important thing. We may have been through pain and separation, but now we have found our way back to each other. At that moment, I knew I wanted to do everything to never lose her again. After everything that happened, we were sitting on the bench, and I was holding her hand in mine. She talked about how hard it was for her without me, and I listened, knowing that every word she said was a new chance for us. We both realized that our separation only made our feelings stronger, and now we were ready to start again without looking back. I promised her that I would never leave her again, and she smiled as if she felt happy again for the first time in a long time. We walked together when dawn began to appear on the horizon. It was a symbol of a new beginning, and we both felt that something special was in store for us. I looked at her, and saw the same girl I fell in love with so many years ago. We were no longer children, but our love remained the same. We walked towards the dawn, holding hands, ready to face the future that awaited us together. We continued to walk through the park, watching the awakening of nature around us. The air was cool and fresh, filled with the scent of flowers that were beginning to bloom. Everything around seemed to come alive with us, as a symbol of new opportunities and hope. We stopped for a moment to enjoy the moment, and I felt the whole world silently blessing us for a happy future. We were together, and that was the most important thing. We did not speak because words were no longer needed. Everything was clear without unnecessary explanations. I felt her hand in mine, her warmth, her presence. It was all I needed. We continued to walk forward, taking our time, enjoying every moment. Her eyes no longer expressed sadness, only peace and quiet happiness. It seemed to me that we had finally found what we had been looking for so long: understanding and unity. The sun rose higher and higher, flooding the park with warm light. The rays fell on her face, and I saw her smile sincerely as they touched her skin. Her eyes shone even brighter, and in that moment I again saw the same Stacy I had known since childhood, cheerful, full of energy and love. We stopped and looked at each other, and I knew I didn't want to lose this moment ever again. Finally, we started talking about the future. She asked what we were going to do next, and I replied that no matter where life took us, we would be together. I told how I dream of a shared home where we can spend every day together without ever being apart again. She listened to me with a slight smile, and I could see her eyes fill with warmth. We discussed our plans, dreams, and what might lie ahead, and every word brought us closer. After long talks, we just sat, hugging each other. The sky above us was clear and blue, as if opening new horizons. I could feel her heart next to mine, and it was a feeling I had been waiting for so long. We were together, and nothing else mattered. I hugged her as if to protect her from all the anxieties of the world, and she clung to me, finding peace in that. We sat under the spring sky and began to imagine our future. I told her about my plan to build our joint home, where there will be large windows through which sunlight will penetrate, and a cozy garden with flowers where we can spend the evenings. She listened with a twinkle in her eyes, adding her dreams from time to time, about a kitchen where we would cook together, and a reading corner where she could immerse herself in her favorite books. Our plans intertwined, creating a picture of the perfect life we wanted to build together. When I finished talking about our plans, she took my hand and looked me straight in the eye. Her words were simple, but meant everything. She said she would support me even if life decided to test us again. She promised that we would be together no matter what difficulties might come our way. I felt her words fill me with power, and I realized that we were truly invincible now. A few months later, we were standing in front of the house that finally became a reality. It was our joint project, our dream that came true. The house was simple but cozy, with large windows and a garden blooming all around. We looked at him, holding hands, and I knew that this was the beginning of a new chapter in our lives. We have come a long way, but now we can proudly say that we have built something together. When we crossed the threshold of our new home for the first time, we realized that this place is not just a building. It was a symbol of our shared history, our victories and defeats, love and devotion. Inside, everything was still almost empty, but every corner promised to be part of something special. We stood in the center of the room, and I hugged her, feeling like our dream had finally become a reality. The first morning in our new home was special. We prepared breakfast together with ease and casualness, as if we had been doing it all our lives. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee spread throughout the house, and the warm rays of the sun broke through the windows, illuminating us. We sat down at the table together, and I realized that it is happiness to live every day next to her, to share every moment. We spent the evening on the balcony watching the sunset cast golden light over the horizon. We talked about everything in the world, laughed, and remembered our past. It was like going back to childhood, when we could sit together for hours, forgetting everything. I realized that this is true happiness, just being next to her, not worrying about tomorrow. We watched the sun slowly sink below the horizon, leaving behind a scattering of golden and pink reflections in the sky. I thought about our future, about what awaits us next. Now, when we were together, it seemed that any difficulties could be overcome. I turned to her and saw that she too was watching the sunset with a quiet smile on her face. Her calmness rubbed off on me, and I realized that no matter what lay ahead, we would be together, and that was the most important thing. Life will not always be easy. We knew it and accepted it, but now that we were able to find each other again, I felt like we could face anything. She understood it too, and her eyes radiated calmness and confidence. We talked about what could be waiting for us, but every word reinforced only one thing: we will be together. I felt her hug me, and that hug became a promise never to be separated again. Returning inside, we sat by the fireplace and began to remember our first meetings, days in kindergarten, carefree childhood, and those moments that united us. She talked about the first time she saw me, and I smiled as I remembered all those childhood pranks and adventures. It was so long ago, but at the same time it seemed like it all happened yesterday. Our memories were the threads that wove our path together, and I understood that this path led us to this moment, to this evening, when we were together again. After talking, we turned on the music and started dancing right in the middle of the living room. It was an informal, impromptu dance, but I could feel our lives beginning to revolve around a common rhythm again. Her head rested on my shoulder, and we moved slowly as if time stopped. Now there was no past, no future, only this moment in which we were together. Later that night, we went up to the roof to watch the stars. It was quiet, and the sky was dotted with twinkling dots shining above us. We lay next to each other, hugging, and I could feel her breathing next to me. It was a perfect moment when you feel that all the particles of life have converged into one point, creating absolute peace and harmony. When we woke up the next morning, the sun was already rising, illuminating our city with golden rays. I looked at her, and she smiled as she reached for me. This new day symbolized a new beginning for us, without fear, doubt, or separation. We finally found our balance and were ready to move on, together, overcoming any difficulties. After our morning on the roof, it was back to normal, but now everything seemed different. We had breakfast together, went to work, and in the evening we met at home, shared news and plans. Even the mundane things took on a special meaning because we knew we could finally share them together again. Every day was like a small holiday because we were close. One day I decided to make a surprise. After work, I cooked dinner and decorated the room with candles and flowers. I wanted to make this evening special to show her how important it is to me that she is in my life. When she got home, her eyes lit up with surprise. We had dinner together, and that evening was another precious moment we created together. One evening, when we were already planning our quiet evening at home, I received an unexpected call. It was an invitation to an important conference abroad, which could open up new opportunities in my career. I shared this with her, and she supported me, even though it meant we would be apart for a while. Her support was something I valued more than anything, but it was difficult to leave her, even if it was only temporarily. I hesitated, but finally decided that the trip was necessary. It was a chance that could change our future. She assured me that everything would be fine and we would be able to handle this temporary separation. Before the trip, we spent the evening together, talked about the future, and promised to support each other, no matter what happened. I felt a mixed feeling of excitement and fear to leave her, but I knew that our love was stronger than any distance. When the day of my trip arrived, we headed to the airport. I held her hand, not wanting to let go, even when my flight was announced. She hugged me tightly as if she was trying to remember every detail, and I felt my heart sink. We didn't know how long it would be until our next meeting, but we promised not to lose touch and be close, even if only at a distance. I would get on the plane and she would stay behind. Through the window, I could see her waving to me, her silhouette slowly disappearing from view as the plane began to move. It was the hardest thing, flying away and not knowing when I would return. Thousands of thoughts swirled in my head, but I held on to one thing. We will meet again. I could feel my heart breaking, but I knew it was only temporary. I arrived in a new city that was completely unfamiliar and alien. Everything seemed different here, from the language to the people on the streets. I needed to quickly adapt to new circumstances, but it was difficult. Every moment I was alone reminded me of her. Work took up all my time, but even then I kept thinking about her, imagining that she was near. Evenings were the hardest. After a long day at work, I would return to the hotel and stay alone in a quiet room. I looked at her photo on the phone, remembered our conversations and smiles, but every day the distance between us seemed to be growing, and the fear that I might lose her grew. I texted her, but the answers didn't always come right away. I understood that she was busy with her life, but that did not lessen my excitement. When I received messages from her, I felt light and happy, even if they were short. They reminded me that we are still in touch, that she thinks about me. I tried to answer quickly to maintain our connection, even though from a distance. But at the same time, I felt how gradually an invisible wall appeared between us, which even messages could not break through. I decided to focus on work so as not to think about the distance and separation. My days became even more intense. I immersed myself in projects, tried to distract myself from constant thoughts about her. It helped, but only for a while. Everyone around me saw me as focused and professional, but no one knew how hard it was to go back to an empty room every night and be alone with my thoughts. One evening I received a letter from her. It was more than just a message. She wrote that she also feels this distance, that it is difficult for her, but she believes that we will be able to overcome everything. Her words were full of warmth and love, and I felt hope returning again. She was the thread that kept me going during this difficult time, and I understood that we cannot give up, even if everything seemed difficult. After her letter, I realized that a decision had to be made. I could not continue to live in this state of uncertainty. I went over my plans again and started looking for ways to get home as soon as possible. Work was important, but I couldn't let it ruin our relationship. It was important to find a balance between my career and what really mattered. The next day, I went to a meeting with the manager. I explained the situation and asked to reconsider my stay abroad. Maybe I could complete some of the work remotely, or find another option that would allow me to get home earlier. It was a difficult decision because my career meant a lot, but I understood that without it, everything would lose its meaning. After that conversation, the waiting began. I was promised to consider my request, but there was no final decision. Each day seemed endless. I kept checking my phone, waiting for news. Anxiety was slowly creeping up on me, and I could feel myself starting to lose control. The only thing that kept me going was the hope of getting back to her. A few days later, I was called to a meeting where the decision was announced. My request was accepted, and I could return home. I felt a relief beyond words. It was a chance to get back to what really mattered, but now it was time to regroup, organize everything, and prepare for the return. I started packing, finished all my work, and said goodbye to my colleagues who have become almost like family to me during this time. It was strange to realize that this chapter of my life was coming to an end. As I packed my suitcase again, I had a feeling that this time things would be different. I wasn't just coming home. I was coming back to her. And that was the most important thing. I was on the road again, this time with a much lighter heart. The plane was rushing me home, and I couldn't wait to see her again. Every hour, every minute on the road was filled with foreboding and excitement. I thought about what I would tell her, how I would give her a big hug when she appeared in front of me. When I got off the plane and walked through the terminal, I saw her. She was standing a little further away, waiting for me, and my heart leapt with joy. I rushed towards her as if I was afraid she would disappear if I didn't touch her. Our eyes met, and I saw as much joy in them as I felt myself. When I approached her, she hugged me so tightly that all my fears and anxieties disappeared. It was a feeling of home that cannot be described in words. I finally got back to where I belong and realized that all the hardships we went through were worth this moment. We were together, and nothing else mattered. After we left the airport, I couldn't take my eyes off her. We got into the car and drove through the night city illuminated by lights, but I did not pay attention to my surroundings. She sat next to me, holding my hand, and I finally felt real peace. Time seemed to stand still, and nothing could separate us anymore. We drove along roads I once knew well, and every turn felt like coming home. The city had changed, but memories of the past were everywhere, in the window lights, in the evening air, in her laughter that filled the silence. That was the moment when I realized that I was home again, next to her. When we finally pulled up in front of her house, I had a strange feeling that it was all a dream I didn't want to wake up from. I helped her out of the car and we walked to the door together. Opening them, I saw a familiar interior, which has always been a part of our meetings and memories. I woke up the next morning feeling her warmth next to me. Light penetrated through the curtains, flooding the room with soft rays. It was the first morning I didn't feel the weight of anxiety or separation. I looked at her quietly, afraid to wake her, and I thought that all this is a reality that I no longer want to lose. I knew that life can be unpredictable, but this time I decided not to lose what was truly valuable. We sat at the table, drank coffee, and discussed all those moments that we missed. She was laughing, and I saw the same bright spark in her eyes as it had been in childhood. I understood that there might be difficulties ahead, but now we could overcome them together. Our days gradually entered into a familiar rhythm, but now each of them was filled with an understanding of how important the moments we spend together are. We started planning for the future, talking about our shared dreams and what we should do to be happy. Life was full of light again, and I couldn't wait to see where it would take us. Every day we gradually returned to our usual activities. I started working again, but this time I felt more at ease knowing I was coming home to her. Our evenings became special moments when we cooked dinner together, shared news, and just enjoyed each other's presence. Everything that previously seemed ordinary now had a special value. One evening we were sitting on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, and looking at old photos. Each of them reminded us of the moments we went through together and separately. I felt like the time we had lost was filled with these memories, and now we could move on without looking back. We sat on the balcony that night when thousands of stars were visible above the city. We talked about everything in the world, plans, dreams, fears. I realized that I was no longer afraid of what might happen. After all, we were together, and that was the most important thing. Each star in the sky was like a promise for the future, bright, clear, and one that we will create together. I realized more and more that I never wanted to lose her again. We sat in the kitchen, and I took her hand, looking into those purple eyes that always seemed so mysterious and kind at the same time. I promised myself that no more distance or work would keep us apart. We have to build our life together, and no external circumstances can prevent it. Winter has come, and we decided to go for a walk in the park. All the trees were covered with white snow, and the cold air reminded of a festive mood. We walked, holding hands, and the snow fell softly around us, covering the ground with a fluffy blanket. I could feel how each step strengthened our future together as we moved forward together despite the cold. When we got home after the walk, we sat by the window, watching the snowfall get heavier and heavier. We understood that there would be new challenges and changes ahead, but we already knew that we could overcome everything together. It was important not to lose this faith in what we are creating and to remember what we started our journey for. The winter holidays were approaching, and we decided to decorate the house together. Garlands, candles, and Christmas tree toys were hung everywhere, adding color and warmth. We laughed as we tried to attach the lights to the tree, and I caught myself thinking that I was missing such simple but happy moments. The world seemed to get brighter and warmer as we prepared for the holidays. The night before the holidays came, and we prepared a joint dinner. The table was covered with a festive tablecloth. There were candles in the middle and various dishes around. I looked at her as we sat down at the table and felt that this moment was exactly what I had always been looking for. A simple, warm home dinner when all worries are left behind and we simply enjoy each other's presence. A man with dark hair and gray eyes and a woman with purple eyes and dark hair are sitting at a festive table. There are candles and various dishes on the table, creating an atmosphere of coziness and celebration. Their faces glow with warmth, and the night winter sky is visible outside the window. The room has an atmosphere of peace, warmth, and calm happiness. After the walk, we returned home, where the fire crackled in the fireplace. We sat in front of him, wrapped in a blanket, and drank hot chocolate. The warmth from the fire and the aroma of the drink created a feeling of absolute comfort and security. It was the moment when you realize that you have found your place, your person, and you don't want to change anything. The fire burned quietly in the fireplace, and we talked about the future. We planned trips, dreamed of a house outside the city, thought about what our life would be like in a few years. I realized that these conversations make us closer because together we create our common. Tomorrow, every small step builds our big story. That night, we turned on soft music and just started dancing in the room. It wasn't a loud dance, but rather a quiet and gentle movement where you just feel her head resting on your shoulder and the whole world seems to disappear. We hugged and slowly moved to the tune that played, allowing ourselves to enjoy this quiet moment. The next day, we went to a small chapel where a festive service was held. It was a spontaneous idea, but it added another memory to our story. As we stood next to each other holding candles, I felt that this was not just a moment, but another symbol of us being together. And this feeling turned out to be stronger than any doubts. After visiting the chapel, we went for a walk through the winter city. The snow fell gently, covering the streets with a white blanket. Festive lights twinkled in shop windows, creating an atmosphere of magic and celebration. We were holding hands, and the feeling of warmth on a cold winter evening reminded me of the importance of appreciating these simple moments. They formed our common history, as bright and pure as the fresh snow around us. I decided to make a small surprise for her. After returning home, I prepared the room, lit candles, and placed flowers all over the room. It was our little festive evening, where there was nothing extra, just us and our shared happiness. When she came in and saw all this, I saw in her eyes not just joy, but something more. The feeling that she was at home, where she was loved. That evening we went to the roof of the house where the starry sky was visible. The cold air enveloped us, but we warmed each other with our arms. We stood under this vast sky, and every star seemed like hope for a bright future. These moments gave the feeling that, despite all the trials, we had reached this moment together, and that was more important than anything else. We sat in each other's arms, and I felt that the moment had come to say what I had felt for a long time. I promised that no more distance or problems would separate us. We've been through enough to know that true love is worth all the effort. And even if we have to go through difficulties again, we will do it together. After that evening, I felt a new sense of confidence. We planned our life together, discussed future trips and new adventures. Now there was no room for doubt or fear. We knew that our feelings had stood the test of time and distance, and that gave us the strength to move on together. We started planning a small trip outside the city, where we wanted to spend time, just the two of us, away from the bustle and worries. While preparing the backpacks, we joked, discussed trifles, and just enjoyed the preparation. It was our first trip together after all the ordeals, and I had a feeling it was going to be special. The day of the trip arrived, and we set off in a small car. Winter landscapes flew past the window, snow-covered fields, forest edges, and icy rivers. Although it was a simple trip, I felt that every moment was important. We left behind the city, noise and worries, and headed for a new common peace. We stopped at an old bridge to admire the view of the frozen river. It was quiet around, and only a light breeze disturbed this silence. We stood looking at the distant outlines of the forest and felt our hearts beating in unison. I realized that it is moments like these that help me feel alive and truly happy. Later, we found a small house in the middle of the forest where we were to stay for the night. This place was like a little haven away from the world. The room inside was cozy, with a large fireplace and soft light that filled the space with warmth. We set things up, and I realized that this was where we could finally be alone together, away from the hustle and bustle. The next morning, we decided to cook breakfast outdoors. The hearth was crackling and coffee was warming above it. We sat on small chairs, wrapped in warm scarves, and enjoyed the silence of the forest. It was one of those moments when you realize that happiness lies in simplicity. In the evening, when it was getting dark outside, we lit a fire near the house and sat next to it, listening to the crackling of logs. The fire warmed, and we began to tell each other stories about our childhood, about our first dreams and hopes. These moments connected us even more strongly because we shared the most secret, what makes us real. During the quiet evening, we started dancing again, only this time under the open sky, where the stars were shining brightly. The wind whispered quietly in the branches, and we moved slowly, feeling the cold of the night enveloping us. But together we were warm, as were our feelings. It was a dance that did not need music, because the melody sounded within us. When it was time to go home, I felt that we became even closer. We left the lodge, loaded our things into the car, and headed back to town. On the way, we discussed new plans, future trips, and dreams, which now seemed even closer and more real. This trip gave us new strength and confidence that together we will overcome everything. Returning to the city, we felt that life around us had become different. The hustle and bustle of winter, work, the noise of the streets. All this no longer caused anxiety because we knew that there is always our common place of peace where we can hide from the hustle and bustle. We started to plan more time for ourselves so as not to lose this inner peace that appeared thanks to our trip. Our evenings at home became especially warm. After a busy day, we enjoyed cooking dinner together, discussing events and sharing thoughts. Lighted candles, the aroma of cooked food, a warm blanket, and books, all this created an atmosphere of coziness and closeness which was so lacking before. We started giving each other little gifts for no particular reason, just to make each other smile and make the day better. These were simple things: a favorite book, a warm scarf, flowers, but they had a lot of meaning in them. Each such gift became a part of our common history, a small sign of attention and love. Our routine has not become boring, but on the contrary, it has become pleasant. Shared breakfasts, evening walks through the city, reading books under the blanket. All this turned into the moments we were waiting for. It became our little ritual, moments of happiness that required nothing more than the two of us. We celebrated the new year in a small circle of friends, but this year felt special. It was about new beginnings, new plans, and new hope. When the clock struck 12, I felt that all this time was not in vain. We were together, and that was the most important thing. I hugged her tightly, knowing that this year would be even better. We spent the next few days planning our future together. Conversations became deeper, dreams became more specific. We discussed where we would like to live, what to do, how to implement our joint projects. These were the moments when each step of planning seemed like the beginning of a new exciting journey that we would go through together. We decided to arrange a meeting with our old friends to share news and just spend time in warm company. It was like going back in time to when we all got together for the holidays. Friends congratulated us on being together again, and we felt that our circle of close people remained the same, despite all the changes. After the meeting, we talked for a long time about the past, recalling both difficulties and joyful moments. We understood that every event, every obstacle made us stronger. Now we could confidently look to the future because we knew that together we are not afraid of anything. We decided that it was time for new changes that would bring us closer to our dreams. It meant stepping out of our comfort zone and taking on challenges we had avoided before. Together we planned new projects that required a lot of courage, but we were sure that we would manage. Our conversations were filled with inspiration because now we saw concrete goals before us. One evening, after a busy day, we decided to go outside the city where you could see the starry sky again. It was the same as when we first met after a long separation. But this time Peter prepared a surprise, a small fire and hot tea waiting for us on the hillside. We sat under the blanket, looking at the stars, and felt everything around us dissolve into the night's calm. The time has come to make decisions that could change our lives. These were career and future decisions that required compromises and deliberate steps. We talked about it seriously, trying to find the best solution for both of us. It was a difficult moment, but we felt each other's support, and that gave us strength. After the decision was made, we began to act. We launched a new project that we intended to develop together. It was a risk, but we knew that without it, we would not be able to achieve what we had dreamed of for so long. The work was hard, but every success, even the smallest, gave us the feeling that we were moving in the right direction. The first results of our joint work were not long in coming. We decided to celebrate it with a small dinner for two at our favorite place. Wine, laughter, discussion of plans for the future. All this added even more motivation. We understood that there was still a lot of work ahead, but we already felt that everything is possible when we are together. We often remembered what we went through, what difficulties we overcame, and how many moments of joy we experienced together. Each of these memories was a confirmation that we are strong when we support each other. In the evenings, we could just sit and look at old photos, remembering the best moments and making plans for new adventures. We realized that everything that happened made us who we are today. All the obstacles, difficulties, joyful moments, it was all part of our journey. Now that new horizons were opening before us, we were ready to move forward, not forgetting everything we had already overcome. It was not the end, but a new beginning, even more significant because we chose each other again and again.